Week 14 of the fantasy football season. Here's a few defense DST units. I have as sleepers this week. The first one, the Jacksonville Jaguars. I know this defense hasn't stopped anyone all season long, but this week on paper, it's a great matchup at the Tennessee Titans that give up the most fantasy points to DSTs on the season. Out there in 95% of fantasy leagues. And I know the last few weeks, it's just been horrible ball games for this Jaguar D. Week 10 versus the Vikings, 12 points allowed, a sack, 3 interceptions. Week 11 at the Lions, they got destroyed, 52 points allowed, losing 52-6. And week 13 versus the Texans, 23 points allowed and 2 sacks, which I thought was an okay job versus a high-powered offense. So like I said, a one-week streaming option and a good matchup at the Titans, where Will Levis takes a lot of sacks. His turnovers have definitely gone down, but this Titan team does give up the most fantasy points to DSTs on the season. So Jacksonville, if you're in a pinch, is a decent sleeper option this week. The next DST, the Arizona Cardinals. So this Cardinal DST, another sleeper option once again out there in 75% of fantasy leagues. And they go out there and they've been a decent option the last month of the season. Week 9 versus the Bears, 9 points allowed, 6 sacks of safety. Week 10 versus the Jets, 6 points allowed, 3 sacks of fumble recovery. Week 12 at Seattle, 10 points allowed, 5 sacks and interception. And week 13 at the Vikings, 23 points, 5 sacks of fumble recovery. So they're getting sacks, they're getting to the quarterback, creating a couple turnovers here and there. And this week it's a good matchup on paper versus the Seattle Seahawks. Give up the 5th most fantasy points to DSTs on the season. So like I said, going back to week 12, they got 5 sacks on Geno in that one. They had an interception, and they held this nice offense down to 10 points in that ball game. So this week, once again, I think Arizona could go out there, surprise some people, and they're out there in 75% of fantasy leagues as a sleeper option. And the third and final defense DST has as sleeper is the New York Giants. So the Giants, a decent matchup with the Saints coming to town. They give up the 13th most fantasy points to the DSTs on the season, but they're still a deep sleeper, no doubt about it. Out there in 95% of fantasy leagues is this Giant DST. Week 10 at Carolina, 20 points allowed, a sack, of fumble recovery. In Munich, Germany, week 12 versus Tampa Bay, 30 points allowed, a fumble recovery. And week 13 at the Cowboys last week, 21 points allowed in that one. So the Saints went down a lot of weapons. Chris Olave's still out. Rashid Shaheed, he's been out for a while, out for the season. Now Taysom Hill out for the season, tearing the ACL last week. And it's pretty much Derek Carr, Alvin Kamara, and Valdez-Scantling is a deep ball threat for this New Orleans Saints team. So right now, well, this Giant team's out there in 95% of leagues and has a decent matchup coming up this week at home. I think they could be a deep sleeper. So that's a few defense DST units I have as sleepers for week 14 of the fantasy football season.